Wouldn't it be cool if we can't build the next Pokemon Go to build a world? Let's build an immersive world where the next 1,000, AR companies gets built onto. So let's build a world. That was kind of the big vision of SuperWorld. And so what is SuperWorld? So, Daran, if I come to Austin and you're not in town, you could say, hey, Hrish, I'm not around, but why don't you check out my world, right? And I could walk around Austin as an example, and you've left me things there. You've left a hologram of yourself somewhere. You've left photos and videos in different places. You've left messages at your favorite restaurants about what I should eat and drink. You've basically personalized the real world in augmented reality.
On this episode of Establishing Your Empire, I host Hrish Lotlikar. Hrish has a background in tech, entertainment, venture capital, and investment banking. He's currently co-founder of SuperWorld, which is a virtual augmented reality world on the blockchain where users can buy, sell, collect, and curate real estate. He's also co-founder of the Hollywood TV, VR, and gaming production studio called the Rogue Initiative. We start off the conversation about how Hrish left New York and moved to the Ukraine to start a seed stage venture capital fund called Eastlabs. This episode covers everything from entrepreneurship to gaming to VR to even fun places to travel in Eastern Europe. You're listening to the Establishing Your Empire show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs, creatives, and future business owners to pursue their passions, grow their organizations, and build their empire. My name is Daran, Herrman, and creatively, I'm best known for my photography. But business-wise, my claim to fame is growing a company from $15K per month in online sales to breaking the $1 million a month barrier. And I'm sitting down with interesting people to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how they have established their empires. All right, I got Hrish Lotlikar here on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. Real excited by this chat today. Hrish has got some background in technology, entertainment, venture capital, investment banking, and a whole lot more. I'm sure I couldn't even get to it all. He's co-founder of SuperWorld, which we'll talk about a lot. It's this virtual AR reality world where you can buy land, and it's on the blockchain. There's a whole lot more to it. I actually own the volleyball courts here at Zilko Park, the sand volleyball courts. So got that locked up. He's also co-founder of the Rogue Initiative, which is TV, VR, gaming production studio, and a whole lot more. But let's stop there and get into the conversation. How did you actually kind of get started with your career, right? Is this something, college on up, or was there kind of a situation to where it got you going and on your career to start with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think a really good one that I ponder myself a lot of times, just as I think about kind of where I want to go even from now. And I think first of all, I think I've always been really curious about things in terms of learning, and have a very strong interest and passion in science and technology, just kind of growing up. And my career in terms of college, I went to Rice University undergrad in Texas. So I'm originally, grew up in Houston, but I was like pre-med, poli-sci. That was kind of my kind of mix of like liberal arts and a lot of hardcore like science, like biochem and physics and all that stuff. And then I kind of went to grad school. Doing kind of, the goal was to do a mix of all of those things. So I was doing an MD, MPH, MBA. That was the kind of the goal in terms of my degrees out of undergrad, and ended up doing the MPH, MBA first, and loved business. Like I'd never thought I'd do an MBA. I'd gotten a grant to do an MBA, and so I was like, oh, okay, I'll do an MBA. That's cool. And then I was just very, intrigued about that. Started working in consulting for a summer. So a lot of people don't know, but my job in college is I used to excise corneal transplants. I used to take out eyes out of people for transplant surgery. So I was really hardcore into medicine. But when I was in grad school and I got into business school, I was like, wow, business is really cool. It's very different, and I started working in consulting, and then that kind of took me this path to doing investment banking in New York on Wall Street, and then really kind of understanding there's this whole world out there where you could really explore ideas and potentially build companies around them. And that was kind of what got me into venture capital. And so that was kind of the progression into kind of going from, kind of the science kind of background to looking at how do you kind of how do you ideate and build companies, and how does that work?
So, and I think that parlays into my next question is you kind of had this nomadic lifestyle for a long period of time from what I've read. And is that kind of how got you, like, how did you actually get into venture capital? Was that part of your travels that kind of got you to that? Or was there, certain job or anything like that?
Yeah, so that happened because first of all, I start off my career in management consulting. I really enjoyed that, learned it a lot. I was in a business development capacity there, and then really thought, you know what, I need to learn finance and really get hardcore into understanding the mechanics of how a company operates and be able to do that at the highest level. And that kind of took me. Advice from some mentors was, hey, you got to go and work on Wall Street. And so I kind of took this 180 from looking at just healthcare and to going to consulting, and then wow, I need to get on Wall Street. And I ended up successfully getting some interviews and opportunities at some Wall Street firms. Joined UBS Investment Bank in New York. And then went over to HSBC Securities, was one of the first people there as they're building their North American practice, about, 15 years ago now. And learned a lot, and ended up realizing that being more entrepreneurial, doing startups was actually like even more hands-on. So how that happened was I was working in an investment bank, advising clients who are doing M&A or IPOs, right? And these guys who are coming to us for this advice are the entrepreneurs, right? They, a founder or CEO who kind of took his company, is now selling it or going public. And I was thinking to myself, wow, I want to be in that guy's shoes. I want to do that. And, I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. And I had gotten an opportunity and got introduced to a friend of a friend who was a VC, a prominent VC in New York, and had a meeting with him about my interest in doing that. And he hired me on the spot. So it was like literally a few days later, I couldn't believe it myself. So that's how I got started in VC. So it's a friend of mine named Adam Stern who kind of gave me that first opportunity.
That's fantastic. So now you're a VC. So you're already in the entrepreneurial world. One of the, I think what I'm trying to get to here a little bit is, so it sounded like that happened through chatting with a friend of a friend, but how did you start? So you're kind of already in the entrepreneurial path. I guess, how did you start your own first company, or was that VC company your first company, right? How did you go from working for someone to owning your own company, right?
Yeah. So, I think that I always had a strong desire to do it. And, I think it's a learning process, and when you're an entrepreneur every day and everything you do. And so you have to start with the strong desire to want to kind of be independent. I think what happened for me is when I was working in investment banking, you work, very long hours, you spend a lot of time, you work on, deals, you get paid pretty well. Right. But at the same time, I think you kind of, as far as for me, I felt like I wanted a lot more agency in terms of like controlling or like being able to kind of impact, the company itself and be able to start a company. So that was a strong desire that kind of built up. And so my first foray is I started this online training program called Wall Street Program long ago, back in '05, because it was all I knew. I knew how to get on Wall Street, and I knew how to do financial modeling and stuff like that. And so, and when I was at HSBC, I kind of worked in this space of like, when new analysts came in, we had to put together a program for them. And, and so that was kind of my first kind of entrepreneurial kind of flash, like, wow, I know how to do this stuff. I can create a course online to teach people how to work on Wall Street. And so that went from that to, oh, wow, I should join VC because now I can learn how to do this more professionally. learn how, VCs invest and start and add value to companies. And so that was kind of the progression to like actually starting. But then, yeah, as you said, VC was where I kind of, learned from other professionals about how that happens. And then also, the companies that you run into at VC firms usually are managed by, serial entrepreneurs or people who have been really successful in doing that in the past. And so then that was like a real awesome school for me as to how does this get done? How do you go from like ideation to, getting, a couple $1,000,000 or, more than that into a company, and how does that structured and all that. So those really important lessons.
Well, plus also, I mean, I'm sure that people you met through that was a fantastic group of people to network with, right? People who are running companies, owning companies, selling companies. So what happens next?
Yeah.
You're at this VC firm, things are going great. What happens next?
Yeah. So, 2009, I'd been there for 3 years or so. The world economy is a little bit in flux. 2008, with Lehman Brothers and, just the start of that recession. And when you're in VC and you have a down market, usually there's a little bit of waiting in terms of doing deals. Luckily, I think we're not seeing as much of that in this situation right now with COVID. I think people are still investing. At that point, it was more financial markets were kind of being impacted, and so there was a lot of worry on Wall Street in general. And I had an idea, and the idea was, wouldn't it be cool to go to an emerging market somewhere and start a VC fund? I've worked in New York in VC, been pretty entrepreneurial, and I love being international. Between college and grad school, I lived in Europe. I lived in Madrid and Paris and spent some time in Eastern Europe. So I loved kind of being overseas, and I was born in India, so kind of traveled a lot growing up, going back to India and places in between with my parents. But I thought, let me just do it. And I didn't know anyone. I got on a flight, didn't know any Russian, and went to Eastern Europe. Literally,
oh, wow.
I landed in Ukraine. I knew like one person.
So Eastern
who I'd been
Europe.
introduced to the week before.
Yeah, so very Eastern Europe. Yeah. Oh wow.
Yes,
Ukraine would be amazing. It's supposed to be gorgeous. Never been. I'd love to go some days. But so you're in Ukraine, and then what?
Yeah, so I got there. Again, I didn't know anyone. I'd actually been introduced coincidentally to someone who worked at the American Embassy like a week before I left. I was on this thing called couch surfing, as you probably have heard. And I had a guest who was like, "Hey, can I stay at your place in New York?" Because I was living in New York at the time. And I was like, "Look, I'm actually moving this weekend, so unfortunately, you can't stay at my place, but definitely come to this party I'm going to." And I guess he was so thankful that I invited him to some really cool party, that he was like, "Hey, I have this friend in Ukraine, you should meet him." And he worked at the American Embassy. So I knew that one person. So I stayed in Ukraine for a month, again, got to know Kyiv, which is the capital, and then went to Russia, then Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Moldova, just traveled around. Purpose was, let me get to know this part of the world. Let me kind of get to know these places, maybe meet some people, and got back to Ukraine and realized that that was the spot for a variety of reasons. One, it wasn't Russia. Russia's a big market. And if you do VC in Russia, you're in Russia. If you do, and the other markets were more like EU, which is, pretty much like being in the U.S. Poland's interesting, but at that time, it been in the EU for a while, and obviously part of that common market. And so Ukraine was like this greenfield opportunity for a variety of reasons. It's a big market, and I thought, you know what, Ukraine's the spot. Let me do it. And so I ended up staying there for a year and a half, and trying to network and stuff. And I got a lot of meetings. People took meetings with me because I was this VC investment banker from New York. And I ended up meeting. I ended up meeting a guy who knew me from New York, like coincidentally. Like he, it ran into him, and he's a great friend of mine now. His name's Dan Rumenick. And he's a VC now. But his point is he was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, my goal is to start a VC." And he was like, "Oh, do you know Victor Pinchuk and East One Group?" And they're a big investor out there. And he basically, introduced me to them and that group, and I got connected with, my future partners. One of which, Evelyn Bushatsky, who ran Techstars in Boston subsequently, and another partner, Olga Belkova, who's now in Parliament in Ukraine. So we all got introduced, and we're all passionate about doing a VC fund, and so we started Eastlabs. And again, it was just being on the ground. Burning the ships, like I'm there, like there's only one end to this is start the VC fund. And it worked out. It took me about a year and a half and we did it, invest in about 35 companies in the region.
Wow. And I mean, obviously a lot of people are going to hear that and they're going to say, okay, like that sounds scary, right? We're going to go to Ukraine. There's, politically it could be interesting. It could be a lot of difference. How did you get over that thought process of, the risk? Was it just because the reward would be so great, or because the way you talk about it sound like no big deal, like Ukraine, green fields, this is great. Let's rock and roll. Like, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, I think it is crazy in a way. I mean, in some ways, and I would say that, I would tell you that I'm very just passionate about, ideas that I have, and really just believe in them and go for them. It's just kind of something that I don't know. I guess it's one of those things. It's kind of built in. It's kind of like how, I got into investment banking. I mean, that's a whole other story. Like, just kind of, I was just like, man, I want to work on Wall Street, and so I didn't even think twice about it. I got on a plane and I flew to Ukraine, and I didn't know anyone there. And then I lived there for a while, and obviously made a lot of friends very quickly, and got very loved the place. It's like one of my homes now. At first it was kind of like, what? Like, it's a lot of new stuff, and I also like that. I'm very, excited about, learning things. I'm not, I'm very, I guess, risk tolerant in a way. Like, I think life is about that. And if I'm not doing something that's expanding myself, giving me a high learning curve, then for me, it's not as interesting. So, I'm nomadic now, right? And so that's a whole other thing. But I think part of my DNA is kind of going and trying and doing stuff, because you only live once, and you know what? That's fun to go and do stuff. But it's also like an interest in learning as fast as I can and getting to know people. And so, I didn't take it. I took it in the opposite way of the fear and the danger and the worry, but more so like, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way this is going to suck.
Yeah. So what about just for the traveling aspect of it? Cause I love to travel.
Yeah.
What's your favorite places in Ukraine or the area? Where's some places to go somebody who's never been?
In the world or in Ukraine?
In Ukraine and in the area, just the Eastern Europe area as well.
In Eastern Europe. Well, it's a wonderful part of the world, and the people are amazing. I would tell you that I have so many friends who are Slavic, and it is a wonderful, wonderful part of the world in general for the people. In terms of places, I grew up in the 80s and really enjoyed history quite a bit. And so, I remember, deep in the Cold War, in the 80s, maybe not as deep, but, coming out of it, I would read a lot about the Soviet Union and the former, countries that were involved in the Soviet Union. And so for me, that historical perspective of the economics and different cities that were, very much part of countries that were in this other kind of, opposing kind of worldview, it was interesting to me. The architecture there is obviously interesting. There's beautiful places on the Black Sea, like Odessa, that are great places in the summer. I lived in Crimea now, which was taken over by Russia. But we lived in Crimea for a while, as well as in Minsk, in Belarus. I love. I subsequently helped start I'm on the board of Tech Minsk, which is a an early stage accelerator in Minsk in Belarus. So I love Minsk in Belarus as well. Totally, different political system, as people probably know, that's coming to become more of a public known fact with what's happening there. But I think there's a lot of places there in Eastern Europe, even outside of that region. So Croatia and Serbia and other places that are also really beautiful. Prague, I think, is gorgeous. You can't go wrong. I think there's a lot there, especially if you're interested in history and beauty and culture. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, completely. It sounds fantastic. It's definitely going to be on the list. So we talked a lot about, financial investments, VCs, all this. And then, obviously on your resume is this production company, like left brain, right brain, right? So how did, and I don't know if we're jumping super far ahead on your story, but how did you get in that world, right?
Yeah, I've always, I guess left brain, right brain. Yeah, I've been like that, since I was pretty young. Always interested in English and the arts and reading and movies and entertainment. As at the same time, always been interested in science and technology and such. And I worked I started the VC fund. I ended up. The story, this how it happened is, and in 2013, deciding where I wanted to live after Ukraine, because I thought, what, we did Ukraine, that was awesome. Living internationally was awesome. Yeah, like, what about the rest of the world? If I could do that in Ukraine, like, what else? Why don't do this somewhere else? And so I had this idea of, hey, what about Southeast Asia? That would be cool. Like, maybe there's something I could do there, start something there. Ended up on a trip to Southeast Asia, got involved in meeting a lot of people there on this trip through some of the people I was involved with in Ukraine, and got involved in a company called TopTal. TopTal is a talent marketplace, which is backed by Andreessen Horowitz, and it's I was kind of the first biz dev at TopTal. TopTal is a remote distributed company. And, this was back in the day in 2013, totally remote, totally distributed, no offices, work remotely, all of that stuff. And TopTal is actually one of the big promoters of the distributed lifestyle. And so, joining them, we started living around the world. So kind of, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, South America, all over. And turned out I was in LA and got involved in a company that's on the YouTube platform as a stealth company. And at that company, because it's a media company on the YouTube platform, worked with directly with my co-founders at the Rogue Initiative. So one of my co-founders actually is the one I worked with. His name is Pete Blumel. His background is he had produced Call of Duty, the game, Modern Warfare series, and Ghosts. And then previously he had worked with, Steven Spielberg at Amblin Entertainment and DreamWorks. And that's a small crew of people there. And so we got to know each other. And, my background was obviously VC and global and tech and stuff. And the idea was, hey, you know what, let's start a studio that leverages, what's happening in this new world, which is virtual reality, which was like exploding at that time period. Oculus had just gotten acquired by Facebook, and VR was really interesting. And, I had a strong interest in VR and AR just because it's cool and it's, I think it's awesome. And so we ended up getting together and saying, hey, look, let's start a company that's focused on Hollywood and creating new original content that goes across feature film, television, gaming, virtual reality, all the way to amusement park rides and, essentially new franchises. That's the idea behind Rogue Initiative. And we partnered with Michael Bay, who's well-known action director, because they'd worked together at Amblin and DreamWorks on the original Transformers, and so he joined us, as well as other people in Hollywood that are pretty well known, and that was kind of the progenitor of that, and I obviously had the investors and others that I'd known from. Even I think one of our first investors I'd met in Ukraine, who ended up starting a VC fund focused on VR and AR, called Presence Capital. And so Presence Capital, we'd known each other because he'd visited my VC fund. His name's Paul Bragiel, and he's a cool guy. And he had known me from Ukraine because he came to my office at Eastlabs in Kyiv, and we ran into each other in LA. I mean, of all places, I'm walking down the street, I'm living in LA, and Paul's there on the street. And then he messages me and he's like, "Hey man, are you doing something in VR and AR? I've noticed you've been posting about this." And I'm like, "Yeah, actually I'm starting Rogue Initiative." And he was like, "Hey man, we got to talk." And so he ended up leading our round for Rogue. And then, that's how we kind of blasted off and did that.
So okay, Michael Bay, right? So massive director. What draws him to you? I mean, why? Because he's somebody that could work with anybody just about, right? And I'm thinking some parallels because a lot of his movies kind of look like could be video games, right? I don't know if that's the draw to have a virtual reality arm there, but like, how do you say somebody sets up the meeting, that's hard in itself, but how do you pitch somebody like Michael Bay to partner with you?
Well, it was a very warm, close connection of my co-founder, Pete. So they'd worked together at Amblin and DreamWorks, and Pete went on to, produce the Call of Duty franchise, Modern Warfare series, and Ghosts. And so you're exactly right. Michael Bay's movies look a lot like a Call of Duty game, and vice versa. Call of Duty game looks a lot like a Michael Bay movie with the explosions and Kevin Spacey acting or whatever, right? I mean, the quality of and the interactivity of both of those mediums are really coming together, and that's what's really interesting right now about the space. And when we go into SuperWorld, kind of talk more about that. But really, what's happening is that across entertainment content, whether you're talking about Quibi on mobile phones or Netflix and what they're doing, we're going from linear entertainment into interactive entertainment, and that those two examples, a Michael Bay movie or Call of Duty franchise, really demonstrate to anyone who's been playing Call of Duty for years or watching really awesome CG feature films, realizes those assets are the same, and so that's kind of the confluence of both of those mediums and the opportunities. And so a filmmaker like Bay or James Cameron or Steven Spielberg or any of those guys really can say, "Hey, you know what? Like, this video game is interesting," and instead of making it an afterthought, right, of, "Hey, we're going to do a big movie, and then, hey, let's just make a video game, just to satisfy people who want to play a video game," that video game actually could become, easily much, much bigger than the movie itself. As you probably know, video games, their opening weekend can be multiple times the opening weekend of a movie, in a big movie. And so the opportunity to be able to create new original content that is meant to go across all those mediums and not as an afterthought. So not as like it had happened before, which is you make a video game and like, "Hey, let's just make a movie about this video game," or let's, this movie does really well, let's just make a video game about it. But it becomes a concerted, effort to do that at the highest levels across all those mediums. That's what Rogue Initiative's about.
I also think the world's gotten a lot smaller there. You got, you do your movies, not just one marketplace. It's not just United States. You might be probably Michael Bay, China, which is probably massive. And then also you have the video game there too. So it just makes sense to integrate, not just, I think it also hedges their bet, right? If we're making this big movie, we can also push out a big video game and get a different market with it. My next question is around co-founders, right? So, met this great co-founder. He's got all these connections, but what's your approach? Because a lot of people talk about co-founders are like, are you ready to marry them type of thing. You need to really love this person. How do you, because and we'll talk about, you have a co-founder for SuperWorld too. What's your approach to finding a co-founder? Do you have any tips or tricks or any super negative experiences, anything, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really awesome question, because I think you're 100% right that, I think it's a mix of a couple of things. Is like, do you enjoy working with this person? You want, first and foremost for me is, enjoying life and, enjoying my day to day, work. Because if you don't like it, then, that's just, that for me would just be too painful. So I have to really, really like it. And so that, I would say that's one factor. I would say the other factor is really, is there a complementary reason that, when you're meeting someone, maybe you're really good at something and the other person, lacks that area, and vice versa. And that can be pretty obvious, just based on, understanding what the core strengths of someone is. So I think that is a really good factor. I think you have to be really, good on the legal stuff. So, make sure that you kind of, get all that sorted. So that way you are protected, you have equity, you're able to kind of operate in a way that allows you to, have a sense of security in terms of your, ability to add value to the company, as you are accreting value. And that, that comes from, experience from VC and, banking and other things, where you kind of just want to make sure that you're kind of setting up the company properly, and you're getting the accretion that happens to the company's value because you are a quote unquote co-founder, or a stakeholder in the company. And so I think it's kind of a matching process of all this stuff. I mean, I think that there are ways to go and find co-founders, like co-founders meetups and stuff like that. And I have heard of situations where people do that. I think in some ways it's beneficial to find co-founders where you work already, or people you've worked with in the past. So that's always been a good way of finding co-founders. And so I think it can happen a variety of ways, but I think you're exactly right. You definitely need to make sure that the people that you work with, you like, and you're protected legally as well. So it's kind of a combination of all those things. And you got all those things, and you kind of have, you can't like be afraid of like doing stuff, like I think there's some people who are like, oh, I'm not going to do anything because like I don't know anyone and I don't know a co-founder. And so therefore I'm like restricted. So I think at the end of the day, you do have to meet people you don't know, whether that's a new investor or a co-founder or a partner. I think my philosophy in that is I have a very open heart, like open to learning, open to experiencing, and as long as I can kind of keep building on my foundation of knowledge and experiences, then that's cool. I mean, I'm willing to try stuff, and I think that happens a lot when you're starting a company too, because you'll meet other companies and you're like, hey, like let's get to know each other, let's partner, let's like do this and that, and then you're like, wow, this person's cool, like I'd love to work with them, or like and that's also happens. It happens to me is a lot of people just come to me and they're like, hey, Hrish, like, you want to do this, and I'm like, yeah, cool. I'd love to learn about it or hear about it. And, so I'm always down to do that too. Sometimes it starts through like some kind of advisory relationship where, people come to me and say, hey, like, I'd love your advice on this. And so you're kind of coming in through this kind of other way of like understanding this person and what they're doing. And then that turns into a co-founder relationship. So yeah, a lot of ways to go about it, I guess.
I love it. It sounds like, one of your approaches, not even so much the co-founder, but just to be involved, is to put yourself out there, say what you're about, what you're interested in. I'm always a big believer in you got to kind of put it out there, what you want. A lot of people are very worried about that and they're closed, and then nothing really comes their way, right? Even just stuff of this podcast, we met on the Austin Startup Week. I don't even think I was talking about podcasts, but then I have this big mic, all this, and then like the podcast comes up and here we are, So it's always fun you got to put yourself out there for sure. So let's talk about SuperWorld, right? So this is an AR social company with real estate. why don't you give us an overview of what it is first, and then let's dive in, right?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you kind of the foundation story of it and kind of walk you through our vision. So, as I mentioned to you, after starting Rogue Initiative, I was pretty well established in the VR AR space. We do a lot of VR content at Rogue Initiative, and we're backed by a lot of the well-known VR AR venture capital funds in Silicon Valley and globally, and so very much in that space at this point. And Pokemon Go came out and became this worldwide sensation, as you know, and the whole world knows, right? It became this very interesting platform. And I got together with my co-founder. His name is Max Woon. Now, Max and I had also worked together previously at this stealth company on the YouTube platform, and he's a brilliant guy. A little bit about Max. So Max co-founded Xfire and sold it to Viacom, but he's done Fizzle, Sliver, Skit, and Toonstar, all venture-backed companies. And Sliver and Toonstar are both in the immersive space. And then previously, he worked in Stephen Hawking's department at Cambridge. So he's this like amazing, genius programmer. And we basically just, we really liked each other and had a lot of respect for each other. And we're very different, back to the complementary skills. He's a very hardcore programmer, and I'm kind of, a global kind of VC BD kind of background. And we were both really excited about, wouldn't it be cool if we can't build the next Pokemon Go, to build a world? Let's build an immersive world where the next 1,000, AR companies gets built onto. So let's build a world. That was kind of the big vision of SuperWorld. And so what is SuperWorld? So, Daran, if I come to Austin and you're not in town, you could say, hey, Hrish, I'm not around, but why don't you check out my world, right? And I could walk around Austin as an example, and you've left me things there. You've left a hologram of yourself somewhere. You've left photos and videos in different places. You've left messages at your favorite restaurants about what I should eat and drink. You've basically personalized the real world in augmented reality. So you have a world, I have a world, brands have worlds. So, Nike could put a shoe in Zilker Park, a big Nike shoe, but Coca-Cola in the same place could put a big interactive Coca-Cola bottle. So any spot in space could have an infinite number of items depending on what world you're looking at. These are all just filters on top of the real world. I have a world, you have a world, brands have worlds. And so what I've described is a combination of Pokemon Go, which is an analogy for adding digital information to the real world, meets Foursquare, which is an analogy for data. In this case, if we all have virtual interactive worlds, lots of data, right? And then the third part of SuperWorld is Monopoly. So what does that mean? It means that we've taken the surface of the earth and we've divided it into 64 billion digital blocks. So each block covers a city block of land. So if you look at downtown, let's say Zilker Park, okay, you gotta buy, where you bought a piece of property, I think you buy a block of Zilker Park. And what that does is you're buying a digital asset. You're buying what's technically called an ERC 721 token. And that's a unique collectible. It's like a unique digital asset. It's like a baseball card or piece of art, you can think of it that way. But the difference is because it's on the blockchain, it's programmable, right? And so we can program it to give you a share of any of the revenue that occurs on that virtual block in augmented reality: advertising, transactions, e-commerce, digital commerce, data, analytics, gaming, anything that happens there that we can attribute revenue to. And so essentially we've created a immersive world on top of the real world that you can buy and sell and own, as well as a way for anyone, creators, users, other developers, to build on top of that world and a whole ecosystem. So that's what SuperWorld's about.
Yeah, and so I think somebody might hear all that and get a little caught up on the filters area. And I kind of just came up with this when you were talking about this. Yeah. Okay, so you were saying, okay, we could have, Coca-Cola could be pushing a bunch of quote unquote ads, but in a much more interactive way. Nike, and then, let's say we're at Zilker Park, ACL is going on, and you have a couple alcohol companies. All this is happening, right? And the way I just thought of that is like, well, that's happening right now on TV as well, but we just changed the channel, right? So that's the quote unquote filter is I'm watching NBC now and then CBS. So my guess is just is be kind of, because you're going to need that for the revenue model of it to make sense. Advertising's always given us so much more for free or for low cost because, they're carrying the stick, right? But is that kind of what you're thinking there, to where I could basically choose to be on a quote unquote Nike channel or X Games channel that's going to partner with Red Bull and a bunch of other companies?
Yeah, so it's a mix of not only, potential interactive, immersive content that's created from brands, and I think you've said it exactly right, which is, I think the advertising space is going to change from being, content that interrupts your normal programming to being content that you might actually want to interact with. So car companies are, coming out with digital versions of their car that you can look at in your living room because you think it's cool, right? The new Cybertruck or, whatever, if you could pull it up in your living room, maybe you'd actually want to go and check out what that looks like. It'd be something cool to experience. And whether that's an actual, 3D object or an interactive game even, right? Or a world that you can experience. The idea is that, two things. One is that you have the optionality of being able to, again, change the channel or see anything that you want to see based on what your interests are. And again, they don't have to be, ad vehicles. They could be, educational pieces of interactive experiences because you want to learn something, or you just want to get a sense for the weather and you want to see it in a different form factor and not look at a 2D phone. I think the idea is, and again, back to the vision of SuperWorld, is to improve your world, to improve your life, to enhance your life. And, I think, there's documentaries like The Social Dilemma that have come out recently that made people question, looking at a 2D screen all day. And, is this sucking me in? And, am I like too enthralled into kind of what's the next, piece of content that I'm going to see? And I think our vision is that your world is your world. And that filter, that, world that you occupy, you don't have to have anything in it if you don't want to. And, it's kind of like your iPhone. I'm a big believer in their philosophy on privacy and data and other things. And so, again, we want this content to not barrage you with quote unquote advertising, but really be this kind of permissioned experience that if you want to see something cool and you are interested in a certain topic, you don't have to look at a video on your phone. You could experience it around you, and you're doing it because you actually want to experience that. I give an example of, like if you want to see, something, let's say related to science, it could be, you want to see the planets or something, right? And you look at the planets and maybe one of the planets there is actually, or the planet of the solar system you're looking for in front of you in AR. That's actually a way of telling you that there's this TV show about the planets that's on Netflix or something, right? And so you're like, wow, they made this really cool solar system that I can learn about the planets, and boom, if I really want to learn more about this, they have a show and I can watch it. And so that kind of is like this, other way of kind of informing you, educating you, entertaining you, helping you communicate, but all of it's very native. So I don't know if that helps elucidate that.
It does. And I was listening to the podcast with Javier Mercedes, the Passion and Progress show. Yeah. I was actually on his show a long time ago as well. And he's been on my show too.
Yeah, so he's awesome.
Yeah, Javier's a lot of fun. Lots of energy in his intro. But one example you gave there, and my apologies if I don't do this well, but is like, say Nike could be a company that would, similar to Pokemon Go, could like hide a bunch of these limited edition shoes everywhere in the AR world, right? And you'd have to go find them, and then you get a prize or something at the end of it. And I think that's really interesting that you could, have these kind of Easter egg hunts. It's just one example, but I think that's a lot of fun. And me as a marketer, because I'm big into marketing, is I love that we can get a little bit. I dislike the push at you advertising model that's been around for so long. And I would much rather have a more interactive advertising model. Even if I reach only a 10th of the people, I'd much rather be like the people that actually want to interact with the brand, right? As opposed to just trying to spray and pray and hope a couple people actually like my ad. So how did SuperWorld start? I know you got a co-founder and all that you've worked with before, but how does one just say, I'm going to do an AR real estate VR company that, like it's quite out there, right? A little bit when you think about it that way.
Yeah. It kind of like, back to, getting on a plane, going to Ukraine, right? It's kind of like one of those things. We're both, again, very passionate about augmented reality and virtual reality, and just kind of really knew kind of the ins and outs of that space from, co-founding other companies, as I mentioned, of Max's and I background. And we what happened was in 2017, Apple started getting this real big push into augmented reality. So it was there's a few different inflection points that we're riding upon right now. Those inflection points are, number one, Apple and Google created SDK, software development kits, related to developers being able to build augmented reality content. This happened in 2017 and 2018. So, we were right on that. That was very interesting for us. The other thing is the reason Pokemon Go could grow that fast is, there's now 3.5 billion mobile phones that are AR enabled, soon to be 6 billion mobile phones. And that's a real big push. So Apple's adding LiDAR, they just added to the iPad, the new iPhone's coming out will have LiDAR. And so that's really interesting. So that's coming as another wave. Another wave that was happening is what's called the AR cloud. The AR cloud is technology companies like Google and Apple and Niantic and, Magic Leap and Microsoft. They're all spending billions of dollars to be able to identify the space here around us, right? And so you can actually pinpoint this spot versus this spot. You know what I mean? And so that's what the AR cloud allows you to do. And, you take, and then the other thing is glasses are coming out. So, you can see on your iPhone, even in 2017 and 2016, people started feeling like, hey, you know what? I have the newest iPhone. I don't need to upgrade to another iPhone because my iPhone's powerful enough, right? And so you have all these tech companies like Apple and Google and others who are like, we need a new form factor. Oculus got purchased by Facebook and VR started really kind of developing. And, AR, kind of started off with Google Glass and other kind of things that Snap is doing with their spectacles. And those other companies started realizing, hey, there's an opportunity here to create a new form factor that's going to be even better than mobile phones that everyone has, right? Smartphones. And so you take all of those together, and this was in the time period 2017, 2018, and we started thinking about the immersive world around us and thinking that, hey, you know what? If we are moving into this immersive world, can we monetize this space in front of us? If everything is going to be in front of us and going to be three-dimensional, what happens to all this screen space? The screen face on your mobile phone or your computer screen, has different content there. But what about here? And how could we kind of think about that? And so I'm a big fan of, Peter Thiel and 0 to 1 and read a lot about these kind of concepts. And so that was something that was really intriguing to us. And I think with COVID, becoming a forcing factor for people to go more virtual, now it's becoming even more understandable. I'd say pre-COVID, people are like, you're building a virtual world. How interesting. Now it's like, oh man, you're building a virtual world. I get it. So you see that happening,
Do you fear that you're too early?
That's always something that people, need to be very mindful of when they're building new technologies, right? You don't want to be too early and you want to time it right. And so I would say that, the 4 kind of inflection points that I mentioned to you, right? So the mobile handsets, the SDKs, the hardware, the AR cloud, and now COVID, you got 5 inflection points, right? You got Tim Cook going on stage and saying, hey, we're coming out with a new pair of glasses. You see all the activity, what they're doing in terms of buying companies. Mark Zuckerberg just announced glasses are coming out with Ray-Bans next year. And so, no, I don't think we're too early anymore, and it's happening. So we're, and we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of interest in what we're doing, and I think, I think it's palpable that people understand it. My mom had no idea what SuperWorld was years ago. Like, she thought I was like, on drugs or something. Like, what are you talking about? Then I remember this year she was like, hey, what's going on with SuperWorld? Like, she kind of understood the concept of it. So, and so that's interesting. It's like, okay, she's bringing it up, then yeah, it's definitely prime time, I think.
So 5 years from now, right? Where do you see, whether you're, however you want to take the question, yourself or the company, where do you see, where do you want to be, right?
Yeah, I think that it's a good question, because as we are evolving as a company, as we're working on products and kind of continuing to figure out how we can evolve, I think the main ways that we think about this is, first of all, we're on the blockchains. We're not going anywhere. Your kids can buy SuperWorld, to say, it kind of goes back to, Bitcoin. You might believe in Bitcoin. You don't believe in Bitcoin. There's only 21 million of them, and people are buying them. You know what I mean? And so you can either choose to have one or not have one. That's it, right? Same thing here. So SuperWorld is around. We're not going anywhere. We're on the blockchain. We're blockchain agnostic. So we're on Ethereum right now, but we'll be on other blockchains as well. We're distributed. We're decentralized. So in one way, that's on the real estate or the virtual key stakeholder kind of virtual land aspect of what we're doing. It's really about, getting users on board, helping people understand what we're doing, understand why they would buy SuperWorld. We're seeing really good progress there. So, our average paying user, buys about 10 to 15 plots, spends about $400 on average. So it just means to us that people, when they get it, they get it, and they're very excited about it. As just buying a plot of land, people who buy a lot and they buy different places have this connection, and it's very viral story too. Like, they tell everyone they know. It's just like blows their mind. Like, what? You're selling virtual land. So on the virtual land, I would say that, we want to continue to sell and to get more and more stakeholders involved. We have this hashtag Team SuperWorld now, and it's just basically, everyone who owns land, or who's kind of who believes in the mission of building a world, and so that's pretty exciting. So we'll continue to do that. On the product front, which again, our philosophy is, we want to build this seamless world. So, other applications can build on SuperWorld. We have our own applications. We have a mobile app that's coming out at the end of the month. We'll do like a soft launch, and then do more of a, serious launch of that later. And it's gorgeous, and we'll kind of get that into market. But we're also working on other applications as well, that also get people into virtuality, right? And we're seeing that happen already, right? So now most people don't leave home and are on Zoom calls. Well, we have applications for those people, like things they can do when they're on Zoom calls, or ways to meet each other on video calls, and they don't have to be all AR. So I think there's another kind of way of looking at this, is it doesn't have to be AR. It just, it has to be happening on the real world somewhere. And so there's a lot we can do there. And again, I've had a couple of calls in the last day or two about virtual avatars, companies coming to us and saying, hey, look, we make virtual avatars. We'd love to have them in SuperWorld. Yes, definitely. So we're open with SuperWorld in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of supporting the ecosystem, in terms of, the companies that are creating cool stuff. And so I would say the answer to your question is, over the next 5 years, we want to really work on, providing users with this awesome experience, integrating with a variety of products, building our own products, getting people on the real estate side to become key stakeholders on the platform. We're, adding a lot to that platform as well, so people can, do a lot of buying and selling and other things. We have a guy named Stephen Wolfram, who's one of the top AI computer scientists in the world, who's joined us. And, one of the reasons he's very interested in what we're doing is because of the fact that the virtual land itself has a lot of, ability to kind of, have this kind of connection with the physical world, right? So if you buy a piece of virtual land somewhere and there's going to be a mall there now next year, that virtual land will go up in value. And so I have this hypothesis, which is, a virtual block in SuperWorld will very soon be worth more than the physical block that it sits on, right? And I believe that to be true, right? And I think we're already even seeing that happen with people repricing their real estate in SuperWorld, right? Potentially higher than that block that it sits on, depending on where it is, right? So yeah, I think it's very exciting. There's an evolution of all these products and a lot to come. And I think it's really getting smart people on board who can help us, and people who are passionate about this. Because ultimately, Daran, we want to improve the world. We want to, give people this, life enhancing virtual experience that benefits them, but doesn't take away from their reality as well, right? It enhances the reality. That's the goal.
And you got to think about phones in 2010, just 10 years ago, and where we're going to be in 2030, just 10 years. I mean, it's a short period of time, a massive difference. Yeah. I do, you're involved in a lot of different things, right? And so I think, I guess, do you have any routines, or what's a normal day in the life? Like, how do you be, anything that helps with your productivity levels, I guess?
Yeah, no, big time. I'm a big fan of, Tim Ferriss and Dr. Peter Attia and, Jocko and all these guys, in this group that you're probably familiar with. And, I read quite a bit, read from I love Ray Dalio and Principles, and I'm just rereading a book by Stephen Schwarzman of Blackstone. And so I have, from my background, I have kind of this, kind of multivariate interest. So one thing I like to do is read or learn, and it's Audible now, basically. And so a lot of what I do is I wake up in the morning and I go for a run, and I'm on Audible. And so I'll just like run, and, so working out's like really important to me. And then I'll go lift at some point during the day. So that's like super important. And like, really, I love that. And I enjoy doing that. And, it's time periods in my life when I haven't been able to do that. Like maybe haven't had a gym, or I'm in the Ukraine and it's like negative 35 degrees or something. And I'm like, oh man, I try not to have those periods happen that long. So that's a big thing, is I'll wake up and go work out. I'm also big into the whole like bulletproof coffee kind of thing. So I'll have a bulletproof coffee. I'll do like intermittent fasting. And again, this is all like Dr. Peter Attia, and I've been a fan of his from like 2012. So, kind of been in that stuff for a while. And yeah, I think that's important. And then I think I also try to meditate. I think that's really cool. I'm Indian, so, that's kind of like come from my like background, like my, growing up. I remember when I was like 4 years old, or 5, maybe. This was like in the early 80s. My mom took me to yoga class, and I was like a 5-year-old. And I remember I'd tell my friends like, oh, I went to yoga today. And they were like, what's yoga? It didn't exist. No one knew what that was in the early 80s, And so I kind of grew up with some of these things. So I'd say like yoga is like kind of, very cool. We just spent some time in Bali and Thailand. So we just moved to the Bay Area. But, before Austin, we were living in Bali and Thailand because I'm nomadic. And, it's my family and I, and we're really into yoga and meditation, and all the kind of stuff that happens in Ubud, or we lived in this other place called Sri Tanu on Koh Phangan Island, which is beautiful on the beach. But it's part of that community, right? And so I think part of, back to the daily routines and stuff, is I think as I've been kind of in these different kind of communities or different kind of areas of knowledge, I think even traveling, I try to pick up different things that are important to me. And like learn from people, and those kind of get integrated into my daily routine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and kind of what I hear through that, through my own lens, is one, with your body, pay attention, right? Whether it's food that's happening, you're working out, what's working for you, and then with your mind is the same thing. Pay attention, but also be up for new things and prioritize some of it. Because if you don't make time to do that stuff, you'll never have time if you don't do it. And I think a lot of people forget that we got to make some time for ourselves, not just our jobs and and other people. All these things you've done. What's one of your favorite memories related to your career so far?
That's a good question. I think it's an evolution. So I'm always, looking to create new memories and new experiences. And part of this nomadic kind of travel is to, like people always ask, hey, so what's your favorite place to live? Right. And I like them all. Like I like a lot of places and they're all really cool. I mean, we live on a planet, and I guess this kind of goes to SuperWorld, right? It's a world, and so I think that, similarly into that question, there's so many kind of cool things that happen in one's life, and some of those are business related, some of those are just life related, some of those are like travel related or whatever, and so it's hard to really pin down one or two, but I would say the philosophy of always trying to look for or just kind of experience and being open to experiencing things. But I would say that moving to New York was pretty awesome. I always recommend anyone to live in New York City if they can. That's a great place for ideas and meeting very dynamic people. I would say moving to Eastern Europe and kind of opening up to, realizing that you are not in whatever that is, depending on your country, moving somewhere else. I'd say that's important. So, I studied abroad after college, which kind of opened up my mind to, hey, I can live overseas and this is cool and you can do stuff. And then again, I would say is, trying different industries. So, I went from, again, a surgical operating room, taking out eyes for transplant surgery, which is totally different than being on Wall Street or being in Hollywood or, starting a world or whatever it is. Right. So it's kind of like, I think being open to these different things, I think is in and of itself, switching industries or whatever is kind of memorable because you start off as a student. And I think that is, again, back to the nomadic thing where you're always open to learning, you kind of keep this mentality. I'm a big fan of Tony Robbins. So I would say if some of the experiences I've had with him, have been pretty amazing. Date with Destiny is like this super cool experience that he does. There's a movie about it on Netflix. But I've been a fan of Tony since I was like 18 years old. So that kind of opens your mind about things and what you can do or what you should do or how you can improve yourself, and constant and never ending improvement, things like that. So I'm always about that. And so that's kind of this open mind about hopefully the next new awesome experiences, coming now. So that's the idea. So this is amazing too. So that's kind of my viewpoint.
And any regrets along the way?
That's also, I think that I guess if you examine your life, you can always think about, hey, should I have done this or should I have done that? Or maybe this would have been better. Or like, should I have not even done this other thing or whatever? Right. And, I think that is potentially a mentality that can be problematic. I think if you even go down that point of reasoning, because I think, if you think the other way, which is like, hey, anything in life like can help you learn about how to, deal with the situation or growth or evolution. And, maybe, a more spiritual way of thinking about it is like everything that happens is like a lesson or, something that you needed to kind of endure. And so again, attitude is everything. And, so I don't think that you can maintain that attitude. There's a great book called, something, the inner soul. It's by Michael Singer. He's a great author. I forget the name. It's something soul. I'm blanking, but Michael Singer has written several great books. One called Surrender Experiment, which is awesome. And then the other one about soul, I forget it is. But this book is kind of an encapsulation of the answer that you're asking, which is, you want to kind of let these like memories or regrets or whatever pass through you. And they're called samskaras, right? Which is all, Hinduism and Indian kind of culture as well. So, I think that is the kind of the philosophy that I would espouse for, things that you might think are like not the good thing or not the bad thing. Because, there's another guy, Joe Dispenza, who has this other book called Supernatural, which is really cool. And it's all about how we're all kind of, we're all connected. We're all part of the universe. And basically, you can create, and it's all, again, physics. And so some of these things, if you kind of retain kind of what's so-called regrets, you're basically kind of connecting yourself with something, right? That is a memory or something physical. And if you don't have those things, then you can flow and, kind of make stuff happen. So I don't know if this sounds a little goofy, but this is, stuff that I strongly believe in, that, I think that's kind of a philosophy that I live by.
Well, it's very similar to what I was saying earlier about you got to control your mind a little bit, because those are going to weigh you down. Those thoughts, negative thoughts, is going to make it harder to make other decisions. And and I'm just a big believer that you could get to control what comes in and out of your head, right? So you should at least pay attention to that and try your best. So my last question I ask it to end every podcast is, how would you like to be remembered?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to be someone that really, I think my kind of values are, I'd love to create. And so again, that is something that I enjoy doing, whether it's companies or, other ideas or things that I have, art, other kind of things. So creation is really something that I'd love to kind of, keep creating, and hopefully those things the goal is to impact and improve the world and have a positive impact on people in the world. So that's really important to me. So I think that, and then, again, just enjoying my life and being very positive about just making sure that I'm doing things that that are fulfilling to, my friends and family and, myself, and so enjoying, so someone who enjoys life, and so I'd say those three things again, being able to always create, impact the world in a very positive way, and to enjoy my life and do things that are possible, and to enjoy that with my, family and friends. So those kind of the three kind of values I have.
I love it. Well, Hrish, it was a pleasure to have you on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. I really appreciate your time, and it's a fantastic message, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate being here, and looking forward to doing more. And I'm so happy that we connected, and thanks again for the time.
All right, man. Cheers.
Thanks.